curiosity, how many of you guys have seen this before or heard of this before? Maybe you haven't read it, but you've heard of it.
What album?
Yeah. It's a really famous story. It's part of a much longer text. Oftentimes we treat this as though it's like a standalone. It's part of a book called The Republic. And this is only about 4 pages out of The Republic. It's a pretty short text. And it's a dialogue form, as you're going to see. The key concepts that you guys are going to have to know specifically for the quiz, these are them. Empiricism, materialism, idealism, rationalism, this concept of true belief, this concept of knowledge. You'll need to know what a philosopher king is, and the forms. And none of these are specific just to this one text. And none of these are specific just to philosophy. But if you guys want to turn your desks, you're free to turn your desks if you want. Wherever you have to go, it's fine. We have empiricism, materialism, idealism, rationalism, true belief, knowledge, philosopher king, and the forms. And the big takeaway from this whole thing is the forms. The forms is a theory that Socrates puts forth that he believes essentially argues that you are not just a body, that you are an eternal soul, that you existed in conscious form before you were born, and that you're here in this body, and that when you die, you will continue to exist in conscious form. So in other words, there is an afterlife. And he believes that how we know what we know proves it. Not just suggests it. It's not just an idea like, hey, here's what I think happens after we die. He argues this is what happens after we die, and here's how we know it. Right. So our question and issue, the big question and issue is, how do we know what we know? Get this down, how do we know what we know? And have it kind of like this too. He's going to draw a distinction between knowledge. So we might, because often if I ask you something like, what's the capital of the capital of California? You'll say Sacramento. You might say that that's something that you know. Socrates would say it's not something that you know. It's something that you have a belief about, but it isn't something that you know. So he's going to draw a very strong distinction between what we know and what we believe. And as he's going to point out, you can believe things that are true, but that doesn't mean that you have knowledge of it. In fact, he believes that there's only one way that you can actually gain true knowledge. The question and issue here is, how do we know what we know? So these are our terms again: materialism, empiricism, idealism, and rationalism. Now, materialism is the idea that nothing exists except for physical matter. Nothing exists except for physical matter. And that means like this podium exists, I exist, but there is no me apart from this body. That everything that you need to know about me, you can know from knowing my body. That means you can know there's no such thing as like a soul or a spirit. There's a brain, and the brain gives birth to a thing we call mind, but that the mind is only a material function of the material brain. And so this is a lens through which we seek to interpret information. So if any of you guys believe in ghosts or things like that, they would say, that if there is such a thing as ghosts, they're not spirits. There's something material, something physical, has a structure just like us, but we just don't yet understand what it is. Anything supernatural, anything like a god or a spirit or a soul, doesn't exist. All that exists in the world or in the universe is physical matter. So, and we get that, of course, from this word material. So materialism is the idea that physical material. After that, empiricism. And this is a word that you could come across a lot in just kind of general conversation. It's this idea that everything that we know comes from our 5 senses. So if I were to ask you, for example, how do we know what we know? I don't remember if I asked you that. I remember asking one of my classes that recently. If I were to ask you, how do you know what you know? Like, what's something that somebody here knows? Anything. Doesn't matter.
Oh, anything?
Yeah.
Know about plasma.
About plasma?
Yeah.
How do you know about plasma?
I watched a YouTube video.
So you saw it. Okay. How else could he know about plasma?
So the 5 senses?
Yeah. So he saw it, he heard about it. Hopefully you didn't taste it.
Of course, usually.
You didn't hear it.
Kind of like fire.
You hear it. This is the plasma.
It doesn't.
So it's the idea that all of our knowledge comes from our 5 senses. The five senses are the things that we use to make sense of or to apprehend, to experience the physical world. And this is the foundation of the Western scientific method. Now, properly, science is not going to say there's no such thing as ghosts. What they might say is we have no way of measuring them, or we don't have any confirmation through the scientific method that these things exist. So if you say something like, let's look at the empirical data, that means that we're looking at studies. The empirical data would mean that we're looking at studies. So you'll hear that a lot, especially post-COVID. Now, empiricism is juxtaposed by this idea called idealism. Now, idealism, the way that we typically use it, if someone's an idealist, we say, oh, they think of like the ideal circumstances. They think of like the best in people, like they're an optimist. That's not the way that Socrates uses it. He uses it to say that all knowledge is derived from the mind, not from your body. All knowledge is derived from the mind, not the body. So it's an opposite view of empiricism. So all knowledge is derived from the mind. And then the last term, you can probably guess, rationalism. It's a combination of the two. Knowledge is derived from the five senses and the mind. So it's derived from sense experience and the mind. So both of these two things are going on. Both of these two things are going on. And this is a view that most people have. This is the commonly held view. It isn't one that you're going to find, again, in Western science, because Western science can't test things that can't be measured. So therefore it can't affirm things that can't be measured through the five senses. So rationalism is a combination between empiricism and idealism. Yeah. This is funny, man. I just feel like absolute garbage today. And then this is like the one talk I look forward to every year. Like, of course, one day I'm going to give it. I feel like trash. All right. Here's some prompts. By the way, when you see things in red, it should catch your attention, of course. And that's what we're working towards here. So the problems are this. Our senses are oftentimes deceived. Have you ever been walking down the hallway and you thought you heard your name, and you turn around and like no one called you?
Oh, yeah.
Or if you go to a pool and you jam your arm in the pool, what does it look like happens to your arm?
It's bending.
Yeah, it looks like it's bending. Is it bending?
No.
No. You don't have to pull your arm out and all of a sudden the air heals your broken arm. So our senses are oftentimes deceived. We think we see things that we didn't see. We think we hear things that we didn't hear. And as I've said, none of us have ever perceived the world the way that it really is. We perceive the world the way that we are. There's this thick layer of personality that everything out in the world has to go through in order for us to perceive it. In other words, we interpret the world more than we actually see it. And this is problematic. Because if it's true that all of our knowledge comes from these five senses, it can't get around this whole idea of personality and interpretation. I mean, I'm sure you've heard before that, with regards to statistics, people say there are three kinds of lies in the world: lies, damn lies, and statistics. And that you can use statistics to justify anything you want. That shouldn't be the case. It's just numbers. It's math. But the truth is that we can manipulate data. We can manipulate perception. So that tells us that something is off with regards to data. So the senses are oftentimes deceived. So the problem there, of course, the implication, the consequence of that is that if all knowledge comes through our five senses, then we have to recognize that a lot of our knowledge is flawed. So if we apprehend all knowledge through our five senses, but our five senses are flawed, we have to acknowledge that our knowledge systems, therefore, are flawed. So when we ask this question of how do you know what you know, it's not a small thing. Because everything that you do in your life is based off of the data that you have. It's based off of the information that you have. Again, that's why lying to a person is so horrendous. Because when you lie to a person, you're literally changing the course of their life. Even if it's in one little tiny small way, the outcome of their life, in other words, if you had never lied to them, maybe their life would end up over here. But because you lied to them, they end up having a whole separate set of experiences and things they otherwise never would have. So even though it was a little tiny thing at the beginning, their life trajectory may end up in a completely different place by something really small that we don't really even conceive of it this way. You know? And then, of course, bigger things can lead to bigger changes. So it isn't a small thing. All right. So Socrates distinguishes between true belief and knowledge. So a true belief is when you believe something that happens to be true. A true belief is when you believe something that happens to be true. So if I take a little kid, say like a, 3-year-old, and I decide I'm going to teach this little kid math. So first things first, the kid has to know numbers. Sorry. So I teach the kid 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And the little kid will sit there. And I'll repeat it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And the little kid will hear it. And maybe by the 5th or 6th time, the little kid will start to make the sounds along with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then I'll be like, oh, he's so cute. He can say numbers now. And so I think to myself, I'm going to teach this little kid math. Say to the little kid, what is 1 plus 2? What's the little kid going to say? No, he's not. Think about what I just said. What comes after 2? 3. Because that's what he's learned comes after 3. So I'm going to say, what's 1 plus 2? He's going to go, 3. Oh my God, he's a genius. I just taught him math, didn't I? He knows that 1 plus 2 equals 3. Yeah.
But maybe he was just skeptical.
Maybe he was just skeptical. So we'll test him then. So I say, okay, skeptic, you don't believe my little kid here is a genius, so we'll test him. What is 4 plus 5? And the little kid's going to say? 6. Oh, it's stupid. I thought it was a genius. Now, does the little kid believe that 1 plus 2 equals 3? Yes. Does the little kid know that 1 plus 2 equals 3? No. They're just repeating something that happens to be true. If they understood math, they would be able to add 5 plus 6, or at least 4 plus 9, 4 plus 5, because that number 9 is in the number set that he just learned. So there's a difference between a true belief, which is a belief that you have that just happens to be true, and knowledge. Now, in order for you to have knowledge, Socrates argues, you must be able to define a concept in order to demonstrate that you have true knowledge. So if I were to ask you to define number 5, you'd have to be able to explain to me and define it for me, to tell me what it is. You'd have to be able to, if I were to ask you, what's the, what is justice? What is goodness? You have to be able to define these things for me, to demonstrate that you actually know what they are. And Socrates discovers, as he goes and talks to people, that nobody knows what these things are. We'll see.